plaintiffs' bar is going to continue to look to statements that are made by the government, and as popular opinion shifts on certain ingredients or the safety of certain ingredients, we can expect that the theories that the plaintiffs' bar uses will continue to shift and become more and more creative.
Hello, welcome to this very special episode of FDA Watch. I'm your host, Wayne Pines. I'm very excited about this particular episode. It's another installment in our signature multi-episode series that we're doing with law firms and other organizations in the FDA space. Today's episode is the fourth and final installment that we're doing with Skadden, one of the best-known global food and drug law firms. So we're calling the series FDA's Regulatory Revisions, Business and Legal Impact on Industry. And we're focusing not just on what FDA is doing, but how what FDA is doing affects business, affects litigation, goes across the board in terms of FDA-regulated industry. In part one of this series, we covered pharmaceutical and biologics regulations. In part two, we discussed medical devices. In part three, we focused on food regulation and safety. And today, we're going to focus on consumer products. And by that, I mean products such as over-the-counter drugs, cosmetics, medical devices that consumers can purchase themselves, dietary supplements, products like that. Obviously, all the products regulated by FDA are in some way consumer products, but those are the products we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on how regulation is affecting the litigation and the business environment with regard to these products, and what it all means, and what companies need to do in order to prepare not just for the current environment, but for the future environment. If you want to listen to any of the previous episodes, go to fdawatch.net, and you can subscribe at fdawatch.net, but you also can access the three previous episodes that we've done with Skadden, as well as all the previous episodes that we've done. Let's meet our guests. First up is Rachel Turow. Rachel has been involved with all of these episodes. She's the head of Skadden's FDA regulatory practice. She has almost 2 decades of experience in food and drug law, deals with a full range of FDA regulatory issues. She formerly was regulatory counsel at FDA, and she also served as in-house counsel at a number of multinational companies. So for the fourth time, Rachel, welcome to FDA Watch.
Thanks, Wayne. Very happy to be back here with you.
Amy Van Gelder is head of Skadden's Chicago litigation practice. She represents companies and universities and directors and officers in complex commercial litigation, arbitration, trials, including a wide range of legal issues that may arise. Amy, welcome to FDA Watch.
Thank you, Wayne. Happy to be here.
Brett Fleisher is an M&A partner at Skadden. She advises public and private companies on U.S. and cross-border acquisitions, divestitures, mergers, carve-outs, all the things that you would expect an M&A expert to represent companies on. She also represents CEOs and management teams in connection with private equity transactions. So for the first time, welcome to FDA Watch, Brett.
Thanks so much for having me.
Katherine Armstrong also joins us. She is not with Skadden. She's Deputy Director for the National Advertising Division of BBB National Programs. This program was established in 1971, and it provides independent self-regulation for the U.S. advertising industry through independent monitoring and competitor challenges. Katherine has more than 30 years, more than 3 decades of consumer protection experience from her tenure at the Federal Trade Commission, including serving as attorney advisor to the chair there. So welcome to FDA Watch, Katherine.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Rachel, as I said, I want to start with you. How is the regulatory approach to consumer products evolving at FDA, And how do you think companies need to respond to the politicized policy environment that we're seeing now?
Thanks, Wayne. So I think that the approach to consumer products is is a multifaceted approach from a regulatory standpoint. So we can talk about FDA, but I don't think we can look at the FDA regulatory posture in a vacuum, because even if you're okay with FDA, there are a number of other regulators out there that impact consumer products. And I think that is the most challenging thing about navigating the regulatory space for these products. So from an FDA standpoint, there is a lot going on. I think, it remains to be seen whether the focus on OTC switch will kind of remain a focus, because that really seemed to be an initiative um, that the previous commissioner touted. However, I also think it's a MAHA priority. And so we still may see FDA really focusing on OTC drugs as an access issue, which has absolutely been a political issue. There are a number of arguments both for and against whether OTC drugs really do um, increase patient access. I think that we've seen some examples where it's been terrific to get patient access to the OTC product, but you also have insurance reimbursement questions. So that's certainly one focus. I also think we've seen, especially through kind of closing the grass loophole in the food space, an impact on dietary supplements, and kind of a renewed focus on trying to help FDA get its arms around dietary supplements, which has just remained a huge challenge for the agency. We're still seeing some really interesting legislation coming and going through Congress, which I think with the user fee package coming up next year, we may actually see a potential legislative solution there. But certainly, basic things like registration and listing for dietary supplements is something that FDA still does not have the authority to do. And then, we've got the implementation of MoCRA, which, really has been going on for a number of years, has somewhat altered the overall environment for cosmetics companies, in the sense that there are registration and listing requirements, there are safety substantiation requirements, certainly, like, thinking about who is on the packaging as the responsible person, and kind of getting more organized around meeting FDA requirements, is something that has definitely altered the regulatory approach for the cosmetics industry. So I think we're seeing quite a bit coming out of FDA. But again, lurking in the background are state attorneys general and state legislatures that have also been actively regulating these spaces. As well as Katherine will probably point out, we got the FTC and advertising issues, that abound in this space. And so it is, I know people think of, clinical products as very, very complex. And I think they are from a development standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, and just kind of putting the products out there for people to use. Consumer products really can give you a run for your money when you're trying to figure out how to navigate the regulatory landscape.
I would just note for the record that FDA just approved a switch. I think it was the first switch in 3 or 4 years for an acne product. And one of the new leaders of FDA has reached out to industry and said, to the drug industry, and said, please identify some additional switch candidates. I just want to revisit that, because I think it's a trend that certainly Dr. MoCRA hoped to start, and that I think there is a great deal of sympathy in the general environment for OTC switches. Rachel, just comment further on the OTC switch situation.
Yeah, there was also the Duke Margolis meeting a couple of weeks ago that looked at kind of the feasibility of the OTC switch environment, and FDA had a public docket that was open around kind of what drugs should be switched. And I think there are entire categories of prescription drugs that FDA really wants switched, and that for whatever reasons, either because they have gone completely generic and there just isn't the desire to put the money behind switching the product, or because there isn't a business case to bring it OTC. We haven't seen things like statins, for example, or PDE5 inhibitors, things that have been around for a really long time that might actually be well suited to an OTC posture. We haven't seen. I also saw something this morning which really piqued my interest that I haven't thought thoroughly about, but I think is going to be very, very interesting in the next couple of years, which is the idea of, generative and agentic AI and the additional conditions for non-prescription use rule, which is, the idea that there are some drugs that FDA would like to switch, but labeling alone will not allow them to be used safely in the OTC environment, and you have to add something to them to make them safe and extend the labeling. And one could easily see an AI-based ACNU that would help patients really understand whether they're well suited for the OTC product, and even facilitate access to the OTC product. So I think that is going to be something that we're going to see that probably will push a lot of things through ACNU that otherwise would have been too difficult to conceptualize before.
Yeah, I think the OTCs are going to be a top priority for the agency. By OTC, I mean OTCs switches. And I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive into cosmetics. You mentioned MoCRA. It's, of course, fundamentally changed the regulatory environment. What are you advising clients to do? There's very little activity with regard to cosmetics these days. We just did a segment on a previous podcast about cosmetics, and a lot of potential actions, but FDA, it's unclear what direction they're heading in right now. What's your view on that?
Well, so I think MoCRA is really more of a self-regulatory space right now than it is active from FDA's standpoint. I agree with you. I think we really were all hoping to see the GMP regs at some point, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. And that was going to be the biggest sea change for cosmetics, was really kind of looking at GMPs and how that impacts manufacturing cosmetics. But I think the concepts in MoCRA are really just good to abide by. The idea that you are transparent on your labeling about what's in it, and for fragrance allergens, for example, and chemicals of concern, and that the products are being manufactured in registered facilities, and that the safety substantiation is on file. I mean, these are kind of basic things that I think go a long way. And I think, as we're going to hear from Amy and Brett later, those concepts are important much beyond just meeting FDA requirements. Because if you can, if your claims are substantiated, if your safety is substantiated, if you have your ducks in a row with manufacturing in good facilities, that is really helpful, both from an M&A standpoint and in being protected from a litigation standpoint. So I think just because FDA is not taking direct action doesn't mean that companies cannot proactively kind of get ahead of the MoCRA, overall MoCRA requirements, and make sure that whenever they do come into being, that companies are ready. I think there is a lot of benefit to staying abreast of those issues.
I want to switch gears for a second. Amy, you're the litigator. What litigation trends are you seeing across the consumer products as it regards FDA regulation? And what are you advising clients in terms of assessing the current risk from a litigation standpoint?
Sure. I think one big trend that continues to proliferate are consumer class actions that are based on a theory that consumers relied on a claim about a product such that it was natural or clean or gut healthy, and paid more for that product as a result. And that claim turned out not to be true, at least according to the plaintiff's bar. And plaintiffs' lawyers are using state consumer protection statutes, false advertising laws, and even common law state theories to challenge the marketing claims about products when they don't fit within the consumer's expectations. That can also extend to origin claims about products. For example, that it was made in the U.S. when some of the ingredients are sourced outside the U.S. So that's one big category, and the plaintiffs' lawyers are becoming increasingly sophisticated about defending early challenges to such cases. The second big category is product liability and toxic tort claims tied to alleged contaminants in products that pose long-term exposure risks and result in adverse health outcomes. Those also can be very profitable to the plaintiffs' bar, and they're becoming sophisticated about testing products for contaminants ahead of lawsuits and developing a factual record that exists. And as I think as Rachel mentioned, the state attorneys generals are also active, especially in the consumer protection area and perceived violations of consumer protection laws. They're investigating and litigating those types of claims as well. And compounding all this is the state level regulatory exposure that's increasing as states are enacting their own regulations, including ingredient restrictions and other restrictions on products, which kind of presents companies with this kind of fragmented compliance landscape and ups their litigation risk even more. So to mitigate these risks, what I usually advise is I think Rachel already alluded to is have robust processes, internal standard operating procedures for product testing and supply chain audits, and thoroughly document all of your scientific substantiation regarding the safety or marketing claims about your products. Because the plaintiffs' attorneys are increasingly independently testing products for contaminants, countervailing contemporaneous evidence will be really helpful to any defense. And in tandem with testing, comprehensive reviews with legal counsel of all of the product and ingredient claims that appear in marketing language across all channels should be monitored to assure that language is accurate and defensible, with particular attention being paid to anything that claims a product is clean, natural, or has particular health benefits. And in combination with all that, closely monitoring and tracking regulations, including at the state level, to assure timely compliance makes a lot of sense and reduces your exposure risk.
Do you see any change in the last year because of the changes that have occurred at FDA in the environment with regard to litigation and with regard to the way that the plaintiffs' bar is viewing the environment today?
Well, certainly I think that the plaintiffs' bar will look to some of the statements coming out of the government to investigate their next source of potential litigation claims. But I think most of the changes that they're implementing are coming in response, especially to the courts, as the courts have, in certain jurisdictions, have become more inclined to dismiss more speculative claims at the outset, which the plaintiffs' bar has reacted to accordingly.
Katherine, I want to turn to you. Advertising. FDA, of course, is involved in a crackdown on DTC ads for prescription products. FTC oversees ads for consumer products. You come out of the Federal Trade Commission. Are you seeing more activity from the NAD standpoint in terms of companies bringing action against competitors, or just overall in terms of advertising compliance? What are you seeing?
Well, the National Advertising Division sees challenges that reflect what's happening in the marketplace. Our mission is to create a level playing field for brands and to ensure that consumers have truthful information. With respect to dietary supplements, for example, or any kind of health claim, we are seeing an uptick in challenges involving dietary supplements and health claims. And our goal is to look at the advertising and, first of all, to see what claim is being made But then it's incumbent on the advertiser to be able to support the claim. If it's a health claim, with competent, reliable scientific evidence. And other claims need to be supported as well, such as doctor recommended or number one, or competitive claims, where one brand will say that their product is better than a competitor's brand.
We're talking about consumer products here, but I can't let you get off the hook without asking you a question about prescription drug advertising and the crackdown. Do you see a lot more activity at NAD because of what FDA has done since last September 9th? Since then, they've issued 75 untitled letters and continue to issue at the present rate about one a week. What's going on from the NAD standpoint in terms of that?
So we have seen an uptick in challenges involving pharmaceuticals, but a lot of it has been in the GPL1 space, where pharma companies are challenging claims made by compounding pharmacies. But we've also historically been engaged in challenges involving prescription drugs. So in a way, that's nothing new, largely because our definition of natural advertising is so very broad.
Okay. Before we go to break, I want to bring in Brett. Brett, certainly the FDA environment has led to regulatory uncertainty. I think there's pretty much a consensus about that. With regard to consumer product regulation, how does the regulatory uncertainty affect how businesses approach deal making? And what are the important issues in that regard?
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. And I think it's really important for our clients to just understand the regulatory environment in which they are seeking to invest. So to the extent that there is uncertainty in with what FDA is doing, that's something that is going to impact valuation. And I think that all of the points that Amy discussed are points that are really relevant in terms of the diligence that we would help our clients conduct on targets that they're looking at, increased litigation risk and anything that would be creating more uncertainty are points that are going to drive value downward a lot of times, unless it can be appropriately mitigated and understood. And there are a variety of different ways that our clients seek to do that. But really, the important thing at the outset for them is understanding where are we, and that is why they turn to folks like Rachel to help them understand how these regulations and what the uncertainty that can be present to their valuations.
Yeah, I want to ask you, and then also bring in Rachel and the others. What does FDA need to do in order to remove that aura of uncertainty that now exists? We have new leadership coming in, not just with regard to the acting commissioner, Kyle Van Montes, but with new chief of staff, new heads of the Center for Drugs, new heads of the Center for Biologics. What does the agency need to do in order to create a different environment with regard to uncertainty? Rachel, why don't you start there and then let the others chime in?
So I think, Wayne, that is a huge challenge in this space, more because of the way the regulatory framework is set up. That yes, there is uncertainty in the sense that it's possible FDA is going to change the regulatory standards for some of these products, or it's possible FDA is going to, force or strongly invite products to switch OTC, or the grass loophole is going to be closed, and therefore companies are going to have to come up with much better, scientific support for those ingredients. But I think the thing that's most important when companies are operating in this space is really understanding their products and having a very clear understanding of what has to be done. Like if a regulator is going to show up, or if if the plaintiff's bar or a watchdog publication gets a hold of their product and sends it to a lab, what could possibly, what ingredients could possibly come out of that investigation? Or how do these companies navigate the extra regulatory requirements in certain states, especially, around cosmetics, for example, thinking through, certain states have registration requirements and certain ingredient limits and things that go above and beyond FDA. And it really is, this often, I think, from a regulatory standpoint, is a maturation issue more than it is a regulatory compliance issue, because when companies are very, very small, they're much less likely to be a target of the plaintiff's bar because there's not as much money to extract out of them. But over time, they become bigger targets. And, at that point, they're also thinking about, probably doing a deal with Brett. And so if that's going on all at the same time, the company is maturing and getting bigger, the regulatory requirements are becoming more real, and they're thinking about doing a major transaction and facing litigation risk all at the same time, the point of regulatory compliance at that point is to boost their valuation while also protecting the company. And I don't actually think it's a regulatory uncertainty issue. I think it's more of a really understanding your product and making sure that you're doing everything you can to probably even go maybe a little bit above and beyond regulatory requirements in this space to ensure the greatest protection.
Yeah, Brett, let me give you a chance to address that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I was going to say, and thank you, Rachel, is that, a lot of times it's really, as you pointed out, it's not always the FDA uncertainty, but it's more in Amy's camp of the litigation risk. And there are a lot of plaintiffs who seek to, extract value from companies and make noise via filing class actions. And there are a number of those that we see in some of the deals that we've done. And a lot of it is really managing that risk as well. And depending on the business, it's, if we know that there is a potential diligence issue where a company is putting themselves more at risk based on the claims that they're making, our clients are really seeking to understand and substantiate the claims that are being made because they understand the potential risk that presents. And I think we see a lot of our clients really trying to understand both, the litigation risk exposure, and then there is the separate element of the regulatory in terms of making sure that the supply chain and the other the ingredients and everything else comply with the regulatory, and that the regulatory function at these companies are really up to par. That becomes a really big part about in terms of understanding what we're looking at and preserving value from the sell side. So a lot of different ways in which the regulatory and litigation framework intertwine.
Yeah, Amy, you get the final word before our break.
I couldn't agree more, and I think it just really underscores the importance of really robust internal procedures and thorough documentation, because then when the company comes to Brett to determine and ask the questions that she asks in her process and determine the value, she has the documentation that she needs. And when the plaintiff's bar comes knocking, you have the documentation that you need to defend against the claims. So it's really just being very thoughtful about that, and being just a responsible steward of the products to the public, because the more documentation and the more robust the internal controls, the greater chance you have of both increasing the value of the company and defending off litigation.
Right. On that note, I want to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about FDA, and we're going to look into the crystal balls. We're back. We're talking to Rachel Turow, Amy Van Gelder, Brett Fleisher from Skadden, Katherine Armstrong from National Advertising Division of BBB National Programs. I want to just ask you all just a general question. What should consumer products companies be paying closer attention to that might not be obvious, might not be top of mind? What should I have asked already that I haven't asked? Where are the opportunities? Where are the pitfalls coming up? Let me start with Rachel, and then Amy, then Brett, and then Katherine.
So I do think we're seeing an interesting trend around ingredients and laboratories and consumer watchdog publications that really has emerged over the past probably decade, in terms of labs are becoming more sophisticated, and it is very easy for labs to create reports that there are toxins in products, whether they are or not. And so I think companies in this space maybe don't realize that these risks exist, just from being out available to consumers. And so, as Amy was saying, really having your internal controls in place and understanding, especially if you're working with a contract manufacturer, working with suppliers, having really good agreements with those partners in place, and really being aware of the risks of being in the environment so you can head them off, I think is a critical piece of being prepared to be successful.
Amy?
I agree with Rachel on that front. I mean, as I think I've said already, the plaintiffs bar is definitely leveraging testing, and they have the resources that they'll go to, and certain expectations, and of course they're doing it after the fact. On after the fact products, not necessarily the products that consumers use. So having the contemporaneous testing at various points in time is helpful to consumers. It's helpful to companies rather. And I also think, and Rachel touched on AI a little bit, but I do have some concern that AI chatbots and things like that are responding to consumer questions about products, need to be. That's maybe a new frontier that plaintiffs' lawyers might be looking at on the marketing side claims. I'm not sure what Katherine thinks about that, but it seems to me that that there could be that could be an area that plaintiffs' lawyers focus in on to make sure that claims about products are consistent with consumer expectations and the truth in that field, and that's going to require some human monitoring and making sure that any sort of use of that tool is following explicit rules that are developed by the company.
Now, I want to ask Katherine about AI in a second, but Brett, let me let you finish the answer to the questions that were on the table now.
I truly have nothing to add to that, so you could turn it over to Katherine.
Okay, Katherine, AI.
Before talking about AI in particular, I do think listening to the conversation of Amy and Rachel and Brett, and talking about the support that companies have for the ingredients in their products, it's very similar to what we at NAD look at. We look at whether the support an advertiser has is a good fit for the claims being made. And sometimes advertisers need to pivot when they see that the testing or the support doesn't quite fit the claim. So the goal is always to have a good fit. With respect to AI, we're seeing one of the two big trends we're seeing. First is the use of AI in products, where a company says, and we've brought a number of monitoring challenges involving advertising, where a company claims that their AI product does involve AI. And we again look to the support they have for the types of claims that are being made. And the other trend that we're seeing that transcends a lot of different advertising is the use of influencers. And the bottom line with respect to influencers, whether you're a large brand or a small disruptor, is that influencers cannot make claims that the brand itself could not make. And we're just seeing an explosion of advertising for consumer goods, dietary supplements, everything on various platforms.
Okay, final question, and that's looking to the future. And I'm going to ask each of you just to briefly look into your crystal ball. If we do this podcast a year from now on the very same subject, what will we be talking about? Where are we headed in the next 12 months? Rachel, again, let me start with you and then turn it over to the others. Rachel?
I think what Amy just said about and what Katherine just said about AI is really thought provoking. So I'm going to predict that we're going to be talking more about how consumers are using technology to access personal care products in a different way, and how those companies are leveraging technology to reach new consumers and what regulatory issues that's bringing up.
Amy, 12 months from now, litigation.
Oh, I certainly think that AI is going to continue to be at the fore of litigation. The plaintiffs' bar is looking into it, and I think we're going to see more robust complaints from the start, with both testing, substantiation, and making sure that standing and other early challenges are that companies have had some success with are less easy to challenge. And I think that the plaintiffs' bar is going to continue to look to, statements that are made by the government, and as popular opinion shifts on certain ingredients or the safety of certain ingredients, we can expect that the theories that the plaintiffs' bar uses will continue to shift and become more and more creative.
Brett, what's going to happen in the M&A space over the next year or so?
I think I would echo just the influence and impact of AI and how that impacts the way that we do diligence and understanding the various ingredients and looking at claims and finding more efficient ways to do the diligence to understand how targets are dealing with these issues. I think we're going to see a lot more use of AI in really understanding the landscape and the specific way in which companies are facing litigation risk, and also just how we understand that risk.
And Katherine, you've got the final word on this.
It is difficult to look into a crystal ball because, as I mentioned at the onset, NAD is reactive to what's happening in the real world. Those are where the challenges come from, and that's where our monitoring program is focused. There's always going to be things that we haven't even thought of that are going to come before us. But as a colleague of mine is famous for saying, the rules for truthful advertising and supporting advertising are easy to articulate, but sometimes it's the implementation that's difficult, and that's always challenging as new technologies are emerging. But we try to look at things as we step into the shoes of a reasonable consumer. And that's our starting point.
Well, I think we can have a consensus that AI is going to change the world, or already is changing the world. And particularly with regard to the FDA world, FDA is rapidly using more and more AI. 90% of the drug reviewers are now using AI, and it's just going to change everything. So we'll meet a year from now and look at how AI has changed the world and what we can expect as we move still further into the future. So on that note, I'd like to thank our guests, Rachel, Amy, Brett, Katherine. Had a great discussion. I'd like to thank our podcast creator, executive producer, Michael Levin Epstein, our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister. I want to remind you that you can visit our website, fdawatch.net, fdawatch.net. You can subscribe there. You can access all of the previous podcasts. And We hope that you not only subscribe if you're not already formally subscribing, but also encourage others to subscribe. Our podcast is growing exponentially. We have well surpassed 20,000 downloads. That's because so many people have chosen to be subscribers and have expressed an interest and do have an interest in FDA. It's a fundamental regulatory agency. And if you do subscribe, then you get notice about upcoming podcasts sooner, and you get episodes in their podcast feed automatically. And just to conclude, as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.